I never thought a simple selfie could unravel 23 years of my life in a single moment. But as I sit here now, staring at that photo on my phone screen, I realize that sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything you thought you knew. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 months ago, I was just another 23-year-old graduate student at Northwestern University in Chicago. I had a loving mother, Elena, who had raised me alone after my father supposedly died in a car accident when I was just 6 months old, or at least, that's what I believed until October 15th, 2024. That morning started like any other. I was rushing through Chicago O'Hare International Airport, my mother hurrying beside me with her usual grace despite being 51 years old. She looked beautiful as always, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing that navy blue blazer she always chose for travel. We were heading to Denver for my cousin Maria's wedding, a family gathering I'd been looking forward to for months. "Mija, we need to hurry," she said in that gentle voice that had comforted me through every childhood nightmare. Our gate is all the way at the end of Terminal 3. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers, announcements echoing overhead in English and Spanish, the smell of coffee and fast food mixing in the recycled air. As we reached our gate, I felt that familiar excitement of traveling with my mom, just the two of us, like it had always been. "Mom, let's take a selfie before we board," I said, pulling out my iPhone. "You know how much I love documenting our trips." She laughed, that musical sound that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. "You and your photos, Sarah. One day you'll have so many memories saved. You won't know what to do with them all." If only I had known how prophetic those words would be. We positioned ourselves near the large windows overlooking the tarmac. Behind us, passengers milled about, some reading, others on their phones, a typical scene of pre-flight waiting. I held my phone up high, both of us smiling naturally, her arm around my shoulders, me leaning into her warmth. "Say adventure," I laughed. "Adventure," we said in unison. Click. The photo looked perfect on my screen, two women who clearly loved each other, ready for another shared journey. I quickly posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Off to Denver with my beautiful mama." Family wedding, here we come. Mother-daughter, just travel buddies, family. Within minutes, the likes started pouring in. My friends from college, distant relatives, family friends, everyone commenting on how much we looked alike, how lucky I was to have such a close relationship with my mother. The usual things people say about photos like that. But then, about an hour into our flight, as I was scrolling through my phone during the brief period when we had Wi-Fi, something made me look at that photo again. Really look at it. And that's when I saw him. Chapter 2. The face in the crowd, in the background of our perfect selfie, partially obscured by a pillar, but clearly visible if you knew where to look, stood a man in a dark suit. He wasn't looking at his phone or reading a magazine like the other passengers. He was looking directly at us. More specifically, he was looking at my mother with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Intense, focused, almost desperate. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was his face, a face I recognized from the only photograph I had of my father. The single image my mother had kept from their brief marriage sat on my nightstand back home, a small, slightly blurry photo of a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She'd told me it was taken just months before the accident that claimed his life. I'd studied that face countless times, wondering what it would have been like to have a father, creating imaginary conversations with the stranger who had given me half my DNA. This man in the airport looked exactly like that photograph, just 23 years older. My hands began to shake as I zoomed in on the image, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. The lighting in airports can be deceiving, I told myself. People can look like other people from a distance. It was impossible. My father was dead. I'd seen his death certificate when I was 18, and curious about my inheritance. Not that there was much to inherit from a man who died so young. "Sarah, you're so quiet," my mother said from the seat beside me. "Are you feeling okay? You look pale." I quickly turned my phone screen away from her, my heart pounding. "Just airplane anxiety. You know how I get sometimes." She nodded understandingly and reached over to pat my hand. Her touch, usually so comforting, now felt electric with questions I didn't know how to ask. For the rest of the flight, I pretended to sleep while my mind raced. I kept sneaking glances at the photo, each time hoping I'd been mistaken, each time confirming what I'd seen. The man's posture, the way he held his shoulders, even the slight tilt of his head, it all matched the mannerisms I'd imagined my father might have had. When we landed in Denver, I was a mess of nerves and confusion. My mother chatted excitedly about seeing family, about the wedding preparations, about how beautiful the Colorado mountains looked from the plane. I nodded and responded appropriately. But inside, I was screaming with questions. That evening, in our shared hotel room at the Embassy Suites downtown, I waited until my mother was in the shower to really examine the photo. I screenshot it, cropped it, enhanced it using every photo editing app I had. The more I looked, the more convinced I became, voice becoming more emotional with underlying determination. The man in the background wasn't just someone who resembled my father. The scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible in my childhood photo but clearly present in the selfie, the distinctive shape of his ears. The way his left shoulder sat slightly higher than his right, a detail my mother had mentioned once when describing how my father had broken his collarbone in high school. This was my father, very much alive, and he had been watching us at the airport. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of our hotel room, listening to my mother's peaceful breathing from the bed next to mine. Every few minutes, I'd check the photo again, hoping I'd been wrong, knowing I wasn't. My mother had lied to me. For 23 years, she had lied about the most fundamental fact of my existence. But why? I thought about our life together, just the two of us against the world. She'd been an incredible mother, working 2 jobs to put me through private school, then celebrating when I got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship. We told each other everything, or so I thought. We were best friends, travel companions, each other's closest confidants. Yet she had kept this enormous secret from me. As dawn broke over Denver's skyline, I made a decision. I would find the truth, but I would be smart about it. If my mother had reasons for this deception, I needed to understand them before confronting her. And if my father was alive, if he was actually following us, watching us, I needed to know why he had never tried to contact me directly. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. It was now Thursday morning. I had 2 days to investigate before we returned to Chicago. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," my mother said, as she emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in her usual elegant style. "Ready for some family time?" "Actually, Mom, I was thinking I might skip the family breakfast this morning," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I have some work to catch up on for my thesis advisor. Professor Chen wants an update on my research before Monday." She looked slightly disappointed but nodded. "Of course, Mija. Education comes first. I'll give your apologies to everyone. We'll meet up for lunch?" After she left, I immediately got to work. I started by searching social media for any trace of a man who matched my father's name and appearance. David Miguel Santos. That was the name on my birth certificate and the death certificate I'd seen. Nothing. Then I tried reverse image searches, uploading the cropped photo of the man from the airport to every platform I could find. Still nothing useful. Finally, I did something I should have done years ago. I searched for the accident that supposedly killed my father. If it had happened in Chicago, as my mother claimed, there should be records, news reports, police filings. There were none. No David Miguel Santos had died in a car accident in Chicago on the date listed on the death certificate. No accidents matching my mother's description had occurred anywhere in Illinois that month. The more I searched, the more obvious it became that the death certificate was either fake or referred to someone else entirely. My hands were shaking as I closed my laptop. My mother hadn't just lied about my father being alive. She had created an entirely fictional account of his death. The wedding was beautiful. My cousin Maria looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, and the reception at the Denver Botanic Gardens was everything a young woman could dream of. But I couldn't focus on any of it. Every time someone commented on how much I looked like my mother, how lucky I was to have her, how wonderful their relationship was, I felt like I was living in an elaborate performance. During the reception, as my mother danced with my Uncle Carlos to an old Spanish ballad. I watched her face. She looked genuinely happy, relaxed, surrounded by family who adored her. This was the woman who had taught me the importance of honesty, who had grounded me for lying about where I was going when I was 16, who had always said that truth was the foundation of any relationship. Yet here she was, having built our entire relationship on the biggest lie imaginable. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside onto the garden's terrace. The October air was crisp, and the mountains were visible in the distance, their peaks touched with early snow. I needed to think, to plan my next move. That's when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. "Sarah, I know this will be shocking to receive. I saw your photo from the airport. We need to talk. I'm your father." My breath caught in my throat. The profile was minimal, just a generic photo, no personal details, created only 3 days ago, but somehow, I knew it was real. I typed back with trembling fingers, "If you're really my father, prove it." The response came immediately. "You have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on your left shoulder blade. You were born at 3:47 a.m. on March 15th. Your first word was Luna, because your mother used to sing you a Spanish lullaby about the moon. And you're allergic to strawberries, something that scared us both when you broke out in hives on your first birthday." I sat down hard on a bench, my legs suddenly unable to support me. No one knew about the birthmark, except my mother and me. The other details? Only someone who had been there, who had been part of my earliest life, could know them. "Why now?" I typed. "Why are you contacting me now?" "Because she's in danger, Sarah, and so are you. But I can't explain over Facebook. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'm staying at the Brown Palace Hotel downtown, room 412. I stared at the message for a long time. This could be a trap, a scam, or worse. But it could also be the father I'd dreamed about my entire life, trying to warn me about something I didn't understand. "How do I know you're not dangerous?" I asked. "You don't. But ask yourself this. If I wanted to hurt you, would I need to lure you to a public hotel in downtown Denver? I've been watching from a distance for years, Sarah. If I had wanted to cause harm, I've had plenty of opportunities." The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. He'd been watching me for years. My father, who was supposed to be dead, had been alive and aware of my existence, watching me grow up from the shadows. "I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m., I typed before I could lose my nerve. I told my mother I wanted to do some shopping in downtown Denver before our flight the next evening. She offered to come with me, but I insisted I needed some alone time to think about my thesis. She seemed to accept this, though I caught her watching me with a concerned expression several times that morning. The Brown Palace Hotel was exactly the kind of place where someone might choose to meet if they wanted to ensure safety through visibility. The ornate Victorian lobby bustled with tourists and business travelers, making it unlikely that anything dangerous could happen unnoticed. Room 412 was on the 4th floor. I stood outside the door for nearly 5 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, I knocked. The man who opened the door was unmistakably the same person from my airport photo and my childhood memories, 23 years older, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years of worry, but definitely my father. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking slightly on my name. "You're so beautiful. You look exactly like your mother did when she was your age." I stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the surreal reality of facing a man I'd mourned for most of my life. "Are you going to invite me in, or should we have this conversation in the hallway?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He stepped back, gesturing me into the room. It was a standard hotel room, but I noticed immediately that he had very few personal belongings visible. Just a small suitcase and a manila envelope on the desk. "I know you have questions," he began. "Questions?" I interrupted, my composure finally cracking. "I have 23 years worth of questions. Starting with why my mother told me you were dead, and why you let her." He sat heavily in the room's single armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 47 years. "Because I was supposed to be dead, Sarah. And because your mother was trying to protect you from the kind of people who wanted to make sure I stayed that way." "I don't understand." He reached for the manila envelope on the desk. "Your mother didn't lie to you out of cruelty, mija. She lied to keep you alive. My father, David Miguel Santos, wasn't just any man who had fallen in love with my mother and died young. He was a federal witness in protection, hiding from people who had already tried to kill him once, and would definitely try again if they knew he had survived. I was an accountant for a construction company in Miami, he explained, pulling documents from the envelope. Seemed like a normal job, good pay, regular hours, nice office. What I didn't know was that the company was laundering money for one of the most dangerous drug cartels operating between Colombia and Florida. He handed me a newspaper clipping from 1999, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Accountant's Testimony Leads to Major Cartel Bust." The article described how David Santos's evidence had led to the arrest of 12 high-ranking cartel members and the seizure of over $50 million. I thought I was just reporting financial irregularities to my supervisor, he continued. But when the FBI showed up at my apartment one night, I learned that those irregularities were evidence of the largest money laundering operation the DEA had seen up to that point. I studied the newspaper photo, a younger version of my father, looking scared but determined, leaving what appeared to be a courthouse surrounded by federal agents. The cartel put out a contract on my life within 48 hours of the story breaking, he said. The FBI convinced me to enter witness protection, but there was a problem. Your mother was already pregnant with you, and we'd only been married for 6 months. The marshals said the program couldn't guarantee the safety of a pregnant woman and a newborn baby. Too many variables, too much visibility. So we made an impossible choice. I would officially die in a staged car accident, and Elena would raise you as a widow. I would disappear completely, let the cartel think they'd won, and hope that eventually they'd stop looking for a dead man. And I felt like the room was spinning. But the death certificate was real, in a way. David Miguel Santos, construction company accountant from Miami, did die that night. The man who survived had to become someone else entirely. He pulled out a driver's license with his photo, but a different name, Michael David Torres. I've been Michael Torres for 23 years. Different social security number, different address, different job. I became a high school math teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Quiet, boring, invisible. But you were watching us, I said, remembering his Facebook message. You said you'd been watching for years. His face crumpled with guilt. I broke every rule, compromised my own safety and yours, because I couldn't stand not knowing how you were growing up. I hired a private investigator to send me photos, report cards, anything that would help me feel connected to your life. When you graduated high school, I was parked across the street from the ceremony. When you started college, I drove to Chicago just to see you walk across campus, and 3 days ago, when I saw you post that airport selfie on Instagram, I realized that someone else might have been watching too. My father opened his laptop and showed me a series of screenshots from various social media platforms. All of them featured me. Photos I had posted over the years, comments from friends, check-ins at restaurants and events around Chicago. But these screenshots weren't taken from my accounts. They were taken from someone else's computer. Someone who had been systematically collecting information about my life. 2 months ago, I got a call from Agent Rebecca Martinez, the U.S. Marshal, who handled my case back in 2001, he explained. She told me that one of the original cartel members we put away had been released from federal prison. Luis Hernandez. They called him El Contador, because he was their financial mastermind before I exposed him. I felt cold despite the hotel room's warmth. What does he want? Revenge. And he spent 23 years in prison figuring out that David Santos might not actually be dead. Prison gives men a lot of time to think, to plan, to nurse grudges. He started putting pieces together. Noticed that the widow of David Santos never remarried, never seemed to struggle financially despite being a single mother. My father pulled up another document, this one an FBI surveillance report dated just 2 weeks earlier. Luis has been in Chicago for 6 weeks, Sarah. He's been learning your routines, your mother's schedule, the places you go regularly. The FBI thinks he was planning to kidnap one or both of you to force me out of hiding. But how would he know that we're related to you if you're supposed to be dead? Because someone helped him figure it out, my father said grimly. The private investigator I hired to keep track of you, Miguel Vasquez, was arrested 3 months ago for running an illegal information brokerage. He was selling personal data about his clients to the highest bidder, including detailed files about Elena Santos and her daughter Sarah. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Luis Hernandez had purchased information about us from the corrupt private investigator. He'd been watching us, learning our patterns, preparing to use us as bait to draw out the man who had destroyed his criminal empire. That's why I was at the airport, my father continued. Agent Martinez called me the night before your trip. They'd lost track of Luis, and his last known location was near O'Hare. I drove all night from Albuquerque to try to spot him, to make sure he wasn't planning to follow you to Denver. Did you see him? No, but I saw something else that worried me even more. He pulled out his own phone and showed me a photo he'd taken at the airport. In it, I could see my mother and me taking our selfie, but the angle was different. And in this photo, visible near the departure boards, was another man watching us, someone I didn't recognize. Luis might have been staying hidden, but he sent someone else to track you. This man followed you onto your flight to Denver, Sarah. He's been in the same city as you for the past 3 days. My hands were shaking as I processed everything my father had told me. My entire life had been built around a lie designed to protect me from people who wanted to use me to get to a man I thought was dead. And now those people had found us anyway. What do we do? I asked. We get you and your mother somewhere safe, and then I turn myself in to end this once and for all. Turn yourself in to whom? To Luis. To the cartel. To whoever will guarantee that you and Elena will be left alone if I stop running. I stared at him in disbelief. You want to sacrifice yourself? I've been dead for 23 years already, Sarah. All I've done is live in fear, while the two most important people in my life have been in danger because of choices I made. It's time to end this. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. There has to be another way. My father smiled sadly. You sound just like your mother. She never accepted defeat easily either. Does she know? About Luis? About the danger? Not yet. Agent Martinez wanted to approach her carefully, through the proper channels. But when I saw that photo of the man following you, I couldn't wait for bureaucracy. I stood up, pacing the small hotel room. We need to tell her everything, right now. She deserves to know what she's been protecting me from all these years, and she deserves the chance to help figure out how to end this safely. My father looked uncertain. Sarah, she's built a whole life around believing I was gone. Seeing me again, learning about this new threat. She's stronger than you think, I interrupted. And she loves me enough to handle the truth if it means keeping me safe. We agreed to meet my mother at the hotel restaurant downstairs in an hour. My father would wait in the lobby until I had a chance to prepare her for the shock of seeing him alive. It wasn't an ideal plan, but it was better than continuing to keep her in the dark while dangerous people closed in around us. I called my mother and asked her to meet me for an early dinner, claiming I had something important to discuss about my future. She agreed immediately, probably thinking I wanted to talk about graduate school or career plans. If only she knew. My mother arrived at the hotel restaurant looking concerned, but beautiful as always in a soft gray sweater and dark jeans. She'd been worried about my mood since we arrived in Denver, and I could see the questions in her eyes as she sat across from me in the quiet corner booth I'd selected. Mija, you've been so distant since we got here, she began. Is everything all right? Are you having second thoughts about your thesis program? I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would change both our lives forever. Mom, I need to show you something, and I need you to promise me you'll listen to everything I have to say before you react. Her expression grew more concerned, but she nodded. Of course, Sarah. What is it? I pulled out my phone and showed her the airport selfie, zoomed in on the man in the background. I watched her face carefully, looking for recognition, for any sign that she knew what I was about to reveal. Her reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. The color drained from her face, and her hand rose unconsciously to her throat, a gesture she made when she was scared or shocked. Mom, I said gently, I know who that is. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. How long have you known? Since yesterday. But I think the real question is, how long have you known he was alive? She closed her eyes, and I could see tears threatening to spill over. Always, she whispered. I've always known. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. The death certificate, the accident, all of it was a lie. A necessary lie to keep you safe, but a lie nonetheless. She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression of profound sadness and love. I have never regretted a single day of raising you alone, Sarah, but I have regretted every day that you had to grow up without your father when he wanted nothing more than to be part of your life. He's here, I said, in Denver. He's been watching us because there are people who want to hurt us to get to him. She nodded, not looking surprised. I know. Agent Martinez called me this morning. My world tilted again. You know about Luis Hernandez? I've known about him for 23 years, mija. Do you think I've been raising you without any contact with the people responsible for keeping us safe? It turned out that my mother had been in regular contact with the U.S. Marshals Service throughout my entire childhood. She'd known about every threat assessment, every time someone connected to the original case was released from prison, every decision to move my father to a new location when his cover might have been compromised. Then why didn't you tell me? Because as long as you didn't know the truth, you were safe. The moment you learned your father was alive, you became a potential asset to anyone looking for him. Ignorance was your protection, but now I know. Yes, and now everything changes. She reached across the table and took my hand. Your father is waiting somewhere nearby, isn't he? I nodded. Then maybe it's time for this family to finally be together, even if it's just long enough to figure out how to end this once and for all. The reunion between my parents in that hotel lobby was 23 years in the making. I watched from a distance as my mother walked toward the man she'd loved enough to sacrifice everything for, the man she'd protected by pretending to grieve while actually hoping for exactly this moment. They didn't run toward each other like in the movies. Instead, they walked slowly, carefully, as if they were afraid sudden movements might make the moment disappear. When they were finally close enough to touch, my mother reached out and placed her hand on my father's cheek, confirming that he was real, that he was there. You look good, she said softly. You look exactly the same, he replied. Liar! She laughed through her tears. They held each other then, and I felt like I was watching the final piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life click into place. Agent Martinez arrived that evening with a full tactical team and a plan that would finally end our decades of hiding. Using me as bait, with my full consent and extensive protection, they would draw Luis Hernandez into the open. The plan was complex, but it relied on something simple. Luis wanted my father, and he believed the only way to get him was through his family. The operation took place 2 days later at Chicago O'Hare, exactly where this whole story began. Luis had been watching our social media, tracking our travel patterns, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make his move. When I posted another airport selfie, this one carefully staged with FBI assistance, he took the bait. Luis Hernandez was arrested attempting to kidnap me from the airport bathroom, surrounded by federal agents who had been tracking his every move. With him in custody, the last active threat against my father's identity was eliminated. For the first time in 23 years, David Miguel Santos could stop being Michael Torres. It wasn't an easy transition. My father had to learn how to be part of our lives instead of watching from the shadows. My mother had to adjust to sharing parenting decisions with someone who had missed my entire childhood. And I had to reconcile the father I'd imagined with the real man who had sacrificed everything to keep me safe. But we were family. Finally, completely, safely, family. 6 months later, my father walked me across the stage at my Northwestern graduation. It was the first time he'd been able to attend one of my milestones without disguises or surveillance equipment. As I accepted my diploma, I caught sight of him in the audience, not hiding behind a pillar or watching from across the street, but sitting proudly in the front row next to my mother. That airport selfie is still on my Instagram, but now I see it differently. It's not just a photo of my mother and me before a trip. It's the moment when the truth finally caught up with us, when 23 years of carefully constructed lies gave way to something more powerful. A family's love for each other and their willingness to sacrifice everything to stay together. People often ask me if I'm angry about the deception, about growing up believing my father was dead. The answer is complicated. I'm angry about the circumstances that made the lies necessary. I'm angry about the criminals who stole years of our lives together, but I'm not angry with my parents. They made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and they made it out of love. Sometimes the truth isn't hiding in some elaborate mystery. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Sometimes a simple selfie before takeoff can unravel decades of secrets and change everything you thought you knew about your life. But most importantly, sometimes the truth isn't about the lies people told. It's about the love that motivated them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets families keep to protect each other, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered something that changed your understanding of your family's history? What would you do if you found out everything you believed about your life was built on a protective lie? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the complex ways families love each other and the extraordinary lengths parents will go to keep their children safe. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable stories are the ones rooted in the deepest truths about human love and sacrifice. After all, family isn't just about blood or DNA or even shared history. It's about the people who love you enough to disappear from your life if that's what keeps you safe, and who love you enough to fight their way back when you need them most.